everybody, and welcome to the next episode of Recruitment Revolution. I am delighted today to be joined by Rob MacNaught. So I've known Rob for many years. He's a senior HR business leader, and we've known each other within a couple of guises of where you've worked, but you are currently at Reckitt in Hull. I will let you talk a little bit more about what they do, because that's going to be the focus of today's podcast. But I wanted to kind of sort of set the scene. So Rob and I have known each other for a long time. And one of the things that we both value is the importance of employer branding all around recruitment and retention. And one of the things that Rob has done really, really well is looking at employer branding from a business to improve recruitment and retention. And there's some brilliant things that you guys have been doing at Reckitt, and also in a previous life of sort of other businesses that you've worked for. So I wanted today to kind of chat through the journey that you've gone on within that as a business, sort of top tips. And I know there's some really kind of, they're not good bad news stories, but there are some bad news stories that people have probably seen in the media that we can kind of highlight that the negative effects that not thinking about your employer branding can have on recruitment and retention. So welcome, Rob. It's lovely to see you again.
Thank you very much, Kelly. It's good to be here.
So tell us a little bit about kind of your role at Reckitt at the moment.
So my role is I am the senior HR business partner for Hull Supply. So effectively, I look after the HR team for the factory based here on the Hull site.
Fabulous. And how long have you been at Reckitt now? It's been a while, hasn't it?
Yeah, so it'll be 7 years next month that I've been with Reckitt. Yeah.
Yes, I think that ages us a little bit, because I think I've probably known you for maybe over 10 years now.
That's right. That's right.
So talk to me about what employer branding means to you in the first instance, because I think this is where we're both on the same page, because we think it is important.
Yeah, for me, it's super important. So employer branding for me is really, it's the identity of the organization. So who are you as an organization, and what do you stand for? And it's a really important thing to think about in terms of attracting talent to the organization, but also suppliers and customers. It works on that area as well. So that's what I would see as employer branding.
And I think when I speak to business leaders and HR professionals quite a lot, one of the things that's always very evident is you can be a market leader in what you do, and Reckitt is absolutely one of those within kind of the manufacturing and distribution world. However, it doesn't necessarily mean that Joe Bloggs, who lives down the road, knows who you are as an employer. So, you know, I look at some websites, and they're phenomenal websites and social media profiles, but they're aimed at customers as opposed to the local market and potential employees, especially if you are selling overseas and you don't sell in your local area. How would people know that you exist?
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Yeah, and there's a lot of that. You know, some businesses are selling to other businesses, so you wouldn't necessarily know that. Or something similar to Reckitt is you may not know who Reckitt is, but you will understand our products because you'll see them in the supermarkets on a daily basis. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's it, isn't it? It's, you know, when you start this journey, it's kind of thinking about, well, who does know who we are? What are we doing well? And then think about, well, how do we tailor that to future workforce? So let's start at the beginning then. So what would you say is a really good starting point when people are thinking about their employer branding? Because I know, you know, when I speak to businesses, it is very much of a, yeah, we want to focus on this, but where do I start? Because, you know, to get to where you guys are now, where, you know, you are an employer of choice in Hull, you know, people do want to work for you, you have a low turnover of staff. You know, it's not an overnight thing, is it? So it has to be an investment. So where would you suggest people start, and what did you kind of do at the beginning?
Yeah, so my advice to any organization is you've got to look at your employee value proposition. And what I mean by that is, what are the benefits that you provide to an individual in return for their skill set, their knowledge, their attributes, and that's ultimately where you should focus. And for me, the first the first step in this process is very much around analyzing yourself. So who are you as an organization? How do you compare to yourself to other competitors in the market? How do you compare yourself to other organizations within your region? And it's really having that in-depth reflection, looking at why do people work for you already? What are these key qualities and these key kind of gold stars that keep people here? But also what is it as well? Why have we had turnover? What are the reasons for people wanting to leave? And for me, you really need to kind of go in depth and spend a lot of time asking the questions and just listening to what the answers you're getting. And what that will do is just give you a great data set to say, okay, this is who we are as an organization currently.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right there. I think a lot of people are afraid to ask the questions, or should I say, they're not afraid to ask the questions, but they're afraid of what the answers might tell them. But I think when you start this journey, you need to be prepared to listen to what your staff are saying.
Absolutely.
With an understanding that you might not like it, but this is the beginning of you changing things if you need to change them. And I think, the employee value proposition, your EVP, is a great place to start. There's a lot of businesses, especially from a small and medium-sized business perspective, where they kind of sit there and go, well, I can't compete with a Reckitt's or a Nestle or, whoever. But when you sit down and look at, well, what are you offering your people? It's not just a salary and excessive holidays, is it? There's so many more things. And I think part of this is looking at training, development, and well-being, kind of a lot of the other non-financial side, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And there's a lot of research around non-financial rewards. And something I did in my dissertation when I did a master's degree as well is just that personal thank you or that certificate to say you've achieved this from your organization and been recognized by your organization massively outweighs any financial reward, definitely.
And I think you're right, because the amount of, in fact, I saw it on LinkedIn the other day where, somebody was talking about reward and recognition, and quite a lot of people said the best I've ever had is when the senior director came and said, thank you very much for your contribution. That meant more than a bonus. And the caveat to that is, as long as you're being paid relative to the job that you're doing, then the salary is not necessarily the most important thing. And I get we're in a cost of living crisis and things like that at the moment. So as long as, you are earning what you should be earning, most employees don't necessarily want rock star money. They want to know that what they're doing is making a difference, and they want to feel valued, don't they?
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. People want to come to work to do a good job. That's what I believe. And I think if you have that mindset, yes, you're right. Pay has to be at a level, but there is so much other things that you can do in order to engage people and, to have them engaged in your organization as well.
Yeah, definitely. So let's break down an EVP then. So for people who don't know what the employee value proposition is, there's kind of 4 key areas, isn't there? So, you've got your financial part of it, haven't you? So your salary and holidays and pension and that side of it. So talk us through kind of the other sections.
Yeah, so ultimately you will have your compensation element of it, as you mentioned, but then there will be another section will be the benefits. So what are the additional benefits or benefits that you offer your employees? So things like, holidays, do they get their birthday off every year? Do they get, if your child goes to school, you get that day off in order to support your child going to school? Is there kind of any retirement benefits? So as somebody who's coming up to close to retirement, do they get kind of financial support? So it's really looking at kind of in addition to compensation, what are those benefits that you offer?
Yeah.
The other element I would say then is career. So from a career perspective, and it comes back to what you said, Kelly, around that training, that development, and that job enrichment. And it's what can you offer? And it's not just thinking about, well, this person's here, they need to be promoted. It's actually what else can you give them, or can you potentially retrain them in a particular area or add to their skill set? So thinking with that type of mindset.
Yeah.
The fourth area I would say is probably the work environment. So that recognition, that autonomy, then, celebrating personal achievements, having that work-life balance. And then the final element will be, or I would say, culture. So what is that culture? What's the norms and values? What's the language? What's the support that you would have in your organization? And that's kind of probably the five pillars that I would normally work to when we're talking about EVP.
And I think there's some really good points there, because I think, I've touched on it already. A lot of people focus on the financial side, but actually, if you're an SME, and you're trying to focus on your EVP, looking at the work environment, looking at the culture, the benefits don't have to be high cost. It can be relatively low cost to you, but of high value to your staff. So things like the birthdays off, being flexible so that people can kind of work from home if the plumber's coming, or it's month end, or like you say, you've got kids parents evening, so can you work from home, go and do that for 20 minutes, come back, make your hours up, those kind of things. So that means a lot to people. And training and development, I always think, is an important one, because if you've got a small business and they have kind of an administration based role, and they go, yeah, but I've got no progression, this job is what it is, I think they forget about all of the other personal development that they can offer that person. It's not just about promotions, it's about, well, actually, is there anything you can do to enhance them in that role? Put them on Excel courses or social media courses, or even just things for themselves. For instance, our administrator here, she wanted to get involved and try some of the CSR stuff that we do working with schools. And she went and did a couple of the careers fairs that we do at the schools and colleges. Absolutely, really enjoyed it. And that's something that she does for herself to build her confidence up. And we've just started getting her involved in some of the mock interviews with students as well. And that's personal development for her, because she would not necessarily have the opportunity to do things like that. And it's enhancing her role and giving her a little bit of extra training to maybe take on some small projects. And so it's not about promotion, it's about making them the best versions of themselves, I think.
Absolutely, definitely. And I think when you look at what is available, it's a minefield. There is so much out there, so every organization can develop individuals, no matter what the size they are.
Absolutely. And I think as well, obviously, because we know the apprenticeship levy is changing to more of a skills levy, that's only going to get better, I feel, because people can use the apprenticeship levy to upskill. And I think when we're talking about upskilling people as well, we're still in a skill shortage as a country. That's not going anywhere, because we have less people in the workplace now than what we used to do because of the baby boomers. And jobs are evolving. So a lot of the jobs that are going to exist in the future don't exist yet. So how do you hire people with experience for jobs when they're not there yet? So actually upskilling your existing workforce is really, really key to focus on. And that can be part of that personal development, to go, well, if we're bringing AI into our work, which a lot of businesses are doing at the moment, look at who you've got in the business that might become a super user, and you can upskill them to lead that integration and then sort of backfill their roles and things like that, can't you?
Absolutely. And the world is changing at probably the fastest it ever has, and will continue to change as well. So it's really important that from a future skills perspective is that you do have those right skills, because if not, other organizations will have them and then start overtaking you in terms of capability. Yeah,
absolutely. So we covered off EVP, which is brilliant. And I think a lot of businesses don't focus on what their offering is. So that's fantastic. We've talked about sort of that first initial stage. So analysing yourself and your business versus your competitors and also others in the market. Again, a lot of businesses forget that their competition could be Aldi round the corner. You might be the only person in your area doing what you do. But if you're a manufacturing business, for instance, or distribution, warehousing, retail, or anything like that, or even health and social care, and you've got entry-level roles that are at minimum wage or just above, your competition isn't others in your sector, it's the likes of Aldi and the large supermarket chains who offer decent salaries and actually decent packages as well.
They do, yeah, and in terms of shift work, different shift work patterns as well. So there's a whole host of things that
Yeah.
could potentially encourage somebody to move. Yeah.
Exactly. So you've got to focus on your geographics as well as your industry. What would you
Yeah.
say the next step is then? So we've analysed our market, we've asked our staff what's important to them, why they enjoy working here. We've looked at the negative side of things. What would you do next?
I think it's asking yourself the question, why would somebody want to work for us and stay with
Yeah.
us?
Yeah.
So that for me is you've got this data set now. Like I say, you've got to be very vulnerable as an organization to hear the good, the bad, and everything else in between. It's actually, okay, I've got all of this. I know what my competitors offer. I know what's happening from a geographical perspective, regional perspective, and industry perspective. Why would somebody want to come and work for us as an organization? And that's quite a difficult question to answer, but again, it's around being that vulnerable and being open and honest, and it might not be a great answer that you get, but then that probably takes you on to that phase of, okay, where do we want to go as an organization, and how do we want to be moving forward?
Yeah.
So I would say that's probably step two of the process. And what's really key about moving into that phase of where do we want to go is EVP and employee branding is not something that should sit with one person or with the HR function. Is you have to get the whole business behind it, and the whole business have to buy into this, because again, you're going to bring people into the organization. They're going to be working with teams. If they're not following the values, or they're not, on board with this, then it's just not going to work. So what's key is once you understand that, is when you're doing this process, making sure that the whole organization is involved in it, is going to give you the best chance of success.
Absolutely. I think you've got to lead from the top down, haven't you? It's
Yeah.
if you're making changes to perceptions and cultures and processes and whatever it might be, you can't change it from the bottom up. It's got to be led from the top, and everybody in the business has to be on board with it, because as soon as an employee sees one person who doesn't care about the changes, then that will kind of breed in itself, won't it? So yeah. I agree with you. It doesn't matter how small or big the business is, if you're going on this journey, everybody is responsible for it and everybody has their part to play.
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. So that would be step two for me. Yeah.
Yeah, fabulous. So we've got to the point of, we've done the analysis and we've looked at why do we want people to come and work for us, what sets us apart, where do we want to be. So we've kind of got that goal now of where we want to be, where do we want to go, how do we do that now, what's that next stage, what did you guys do?
Yeah, so I think the next stage then is you then need to start thinking about the project plan and the path that's going to get you there. And I think the key message here is it is a journey, not a destination.
Yeah.
And it will continue to evolve and change as the world does. So again, you've got to take that into perspective when you're thinking about this, but really it's about putting that detailed plan in place. And I think what's worked for us in particular is getting the employees to lead work streams or be involved in the work streams. Again, if you take out the HR and the senior leadership and get the employees working on that, again, there's the personal development that comes with that. But again, you're going to have more engagement. You're going to get a lot more insight, a lot more ideas.
Yeah.
And that's something, certainly we have employee representative groups across the organization, representing, LGBTQ plus, women, and disability, and all of those are led by multiple employees in the organization who are not in HR. Yes, HR will support them with certain things, but again, we've seen great benefit with having those, because they're just so passionate and energetic, and they will give you so much idea, so much commitment, so much motivation to drive things forward.
And I think that's important as well, that peer-to-peer support, because sometimes, and this is nothing against kind of HR and people-based roles, but the perception of who you guys are within a business is sometimes, you sit in an office somewhere, or you only come on the shop floor if there's a problem or whatever it might be. And if you don't necessarily have the right outlook within a business and the employees don't see the value in HR and people-based roles, they are more likely to listen to their peers. And
Yeah.
so having employee groups, workshops, whatever you want to call them, that employee voice, I think is vital in the world that we're in now, because they're the ones doing the job, coming to work every day. They're the ones that know what's going to make things better. They know what changes they want. And like you say, you need to guide it from a legal perspective and from a financial perspective of what the business can and can't do. But if they want changes to happen, so for instance, you've mentioned the LGBTQ plus and kind of females in senior leadership teams and the ED&I side, which is all amazing, and I'm a massive advocate for that. But actually, if you were trying to do that just yourself, how would you know what those people would need and want? Nothing against you, Rob, but you're not a woman, so how
Exactly, yeah. No, you're absolutely right.
How much information do you have about kind of supporting women going through menopause or pregnancy loss or things like that? And the LGBTQ side, what support do they need? What do they want to celebrate? People from ethnic minorities, and it's all that kind of stuff. Best will in the world, you can't be and know everything. So having the right people within the business who want to step up and volunteer into that, like you say, it's great for their personal development, but it actually really sort of skyrockets that employee engagement part of it, doesn't it?
It does. And I'm fortunate that I'm part of our disability ERG here at Reckitt, and it's an incredible group of people who are just super passionate in helping other people that are impacted by disability, don't necessarily have to have a disability, but might be a carer for somebody that is, and just seeing the work that's happened there has been fantastic. It really has.
And I think that's the thing, isn't it? It's having that awareness that it's the impact different things can have on people. It might not be them themselves, but somebody in their circle or people within their circle could be impacted by lots of different things. So, it's kind of having that emotional intelligence to understand the impact that may have. I've done a lot of work recently on menopause in the workplace, and one of our other podcasts actually had Sharon MacArthur, Miss Menopause, on, and she's fab. And actually what she always says is she wants more men in the room when she's talking, because actually every man in the world has got a mum or a daughter or a sister or an auntie or a female colleague or whatever, a girlfriend, who will, because it affects 100% of women, go through it. So why that impact that will have on a man's life, I don't think they think about it until it probably happens.
Absolutely,
So it's whether you're a carer for somebody with a disability, or you have a child who's neurodiverse, or you are married to somebody who's struggling with the menopause, or you've got a colleague who sits next to you who has maybe just gone through pregnancy loss, or you're working closely with somebody who has just joined the business, who might be from a different religion but is needing support in terms of where they can go to do their prayers, or whatever that might be. There's so many different things. It can affect everybody at any given time. So I think that getting employees involved is, for me, it's one of the top things. And whether you only have two people who manage that, if you're only a small business, or you've got, like you guys have got different committees for different things, absolutely brilliant. And there's a lot of businesses who do this, but they only do it for maybe like the social side, or we have a social committee. But actually, why wouldn't you have committees for everything else as well?
Absolutely, definitely. And to your point, Kelly, there, helping people understand the challenges, it just makes the environment a lot more inclusive, a lot more supportive, and there's a lot of benefits with doing that. And certainly, I've been on a personal journey of listening to people's stories and understanding the challenges, and you think, wow, actually, we need to do something here, or now I get why a lot of people are talking about it, and it's quite a light bulb moment when that happens.
Absolutely. And I think so. If we go back to this plan, and I know, because I work with a lot of business leaders on their employer branding, and the plan bit is, it can be a massive list, can't it?
Yes.
And you kind of go, right, there's so many things that I want to do. Are there any kind of key things, maybe like your top 3, your top 5 things that you would kind of go, right, these are the things that we focused on to start with, or that we knew were really, really important?
So I think, what the first thing is that commitment from the organization. You need to have that, and it's the commitment for the long journey. Like I said, it's a journey, not a destination. So for me, that is a non-negotiable. If you're going to go on this journey, you need to have that commitment. In terms of priorities, it really depends for me on the organization and what's happened kind of in the phase one and the phase two, really. You're right, there will be a list as long as your arm of different things that you want to work on. What a lot of organizations have done, and certainly we did, is we broke it down into maybe key buckets that we wanted to look at, and put some of the initiatives in those buckets. And that then just gives you a little bit more structure. But I've seen it in different ways, Kelly, from being honest with you. Some organizations have said, do you know what? This list here are the quick, easy wins that we could implement tomorrow. So let's just get on and focus on doing that. And then the ones that are a bit more longer term that might need more financial impact or budgeting and things like that, then you start budgeting for those and scheduling those in the diary. Others have kind of said, actually, when we've done that analysis phase at the start, these are three key areas or two key areas that we are fundamentally missing. And actually, if we don't tackle these now, it's going to cause us even more problems. So therefore, what they've done is they've focused their efforts on that as a priority and then scheduled other things in further down the line. So it really, I know that sounds quite generic, but it really depends on what information, what's the data that's happened in phase one and phase two of the process.
And I think one of the things that I've seen is public perception. Mm-hmm. So when we're looking at employer branding, you are kind of looking at, well, how do the public perceive you? So for me, it's actually, do they know you exist? And if they don't, so part of this plan needs to be, well, how do we get visible? Mm-hmm. If they do know you exist, have you sat and Googled yourself? Because, I think you can sit there and go, oh, yeah, people do know who we are, we're well known, blah, blah, blah. But it's like, actually, who's writing what and where? When was the last time that you Googled the company or Googled some of your key employees? Because I think everybody can be surprised about what's been written about them that they're not aware of, especially if they've not been tagged in it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, I think that's important. And I think it's probably a good time for us to talk about kind of some of the bad press that has happened about businesses, that it can be massively detrimental to your employer branding. So I think one of the big ones for me, and it's still ongoing, is kind of Amazon. Mm-hmm. And they are obviously growing at a rapid rate, but they've had a lot of media coverage about kind of how they're treating their employees and the pay and the shifts and the hours, and it was a couple of years ago now, wasn't it? And they changed their advertising campaign. So instead of advertising what they did, they started advertising their staff talking about how great it was to work there. And it was a deliberate kind of switch in terms of their PR, wasn't it? Because they were getting absolutely slated as an employer. So instead of advertising what they did, they went, right, well, we'll just advertise who we are and what it's like to work here, because it by default will advertise the business, but they wanted to build that employer branding back up, didn't they? That was something that they focused on.
Yeah, the EVP is they had to completely rewrite it effectively. And actually, to your point then, why do people want to stay, and how do we want to be as an organization? And especially when an organization such as Amazon, they've got massive growth ambitions right across the globe, is you need to be attracting people. So yeah, they had to go on that journey. And ultimately they've come out the other side of that now.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting because I think, when I mention that story to people, they've all seen the advert, but it's not until you kind of go, but they're not advertising what they do. Yeah. And it's that thing of going, oh no, they're not telling us that they're a distribution centre at all. It's the staff going, I work here because.
Yeah, and I've got a career, or I'm being developed into this type of role. Yeah. Definitely.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And there's some other ones, I think, we all saw, because it went viral, the clips of the airline, didn't we? A few years ago. Can you remember which airline it was? Was it BA or?
I think it was BA from memory, or Virgin, was it?
Yeah,
I can't remember now. Yeah, yeah.
and they were dragging the guy off the plane. And I think this is another thing that I think businesses forget about is in the world that we're in now, where people record everything. If something happens, and as a business leader, you're not aware because you're not there, and somebody records it, it can go viral, and there is nothing you can do about it. And
Yeah.
that I think was pretty catastrophic, where they dragged the guy off the plane because they wanted him to give up his seat for a member of staff, didn't they?
Yeah, that was right. Yeah, definitely. And you're right, that we've all got phones now, all got camera capability. There's a lot of that. You see it all over social media all the time. So you have to be very careful as an organization. And if something does happen like that, it's also important to think how you respond as well.
Yeah.
But on the flip side of that, a few years ago, Virgin Atlantic brought out a new policy where they basically they used to have a uniform for females and a uniform for males.
Yes.
And what they did was they said, you can pick and choose whatever uniform you want. And by doing that, they really made it more of an inclusive environment. And what they saw as a result was that their applications for cabin crew jumped up by thousands as something like that. So something as simple as just allowing whoever to wear uniform, and what uniform of your choice, it made such a massive impact to their talent attraction and recruitment process.
Absolutely. And again, they use that as part of their advertising as an employer. So, advertising the airline in terms of trying to attract customers to use the airline, but actually focusing on their employees wearing different types of uniform. The male employees were wearing makeup, the female employees didn't have to wear it, and again, cabin crew is one of those jobs that have historically always been very, very strict about uniform, how you look, makeup, shape, size. In the world that we're in now, where kind of dress code and shape and size shouldn't matter, it still does in that world. So, Virgin were very much breaking barriers by going, let's do this differently. What actually does that matter as long as you're good at your job? And then using that within their marketing to customers, but by default promoting their employer brand, has had a massive impact on, like you say, their recruitment and retention. So, I think when people are thinking about how do I promote my employer brand, it's as simple as you're marketing your business, but if you're marketing your employees, that's still marketing your business, but you're showing what a great place it is to work. And I think, locally, there's lots and lots of businesses that do that. I know you guys do that. There's a lot of sort of smaller businesses that I know that use not necessarily sort of TV advertising, because we can't all afford that, but social media especially, and they showcase what their staff are doing. And one of the best examples of that for me is kind of thinking back to the pandemic. And, how many employees in businesses, especially on the front line, were doing TikTok videos.
Yeah.
And you kind of go, actually, at its worst in the country, people working on the front line, either in hospitals or in care homes or in schools, whatever it might be, they were still trying to have fun at work. And we're doing, all the TikTok dances and things like that. And I found that incredible because I watched them going, do you know what, actually, you're actually still quite happy at work. You were doing what you could to kind of make it fun and engaging. But that slowed down a lot, and it isn't as prevalent now because I think a lot of businesses have got really, really strict on what their employees can and can't do. And there's all of those social media guidelines, which, don't get me wrong, you've got to have them into a point. But actually, your people are the best way of promoting what a great place it is to work. So why not, under guidance, allow them to do these things? Because like you say, if you're sat there listening to them and asking them the questions of going, what do you want? And then you've got these employee committees going, well, we want this and we want that. And can we do X, Y, and Z? Well, why not get them involved and go, okay, well, if... And I think you do see things like your Macmillan bake sales and, and Tough Mudders and stuff like that. But actually, there's so many other things that go on internally in businesses that showcase what a great place it is to work that nobody puts out there. and you speak to people and go, well, what makes this a great place to work? And everybody will tell me, and these businesses I work with in this area are amazing. And then I sit there and go, but how does anybody know that? And they're like, oh, when they come, they will. Yeah, but how do you get them there, though? They need to know this now to attract them. Like, I get your retention's good, but why would they come and apply in the first place? You've got to get that message out, haven't you?
You do, and with social media as well, one of the advantages is there's actually very, very minimal cost to it. So to actually do this really just takes some time and some skill set of knowing how to, to your point, have those clear boundaries, but then really showcase your organization in the way that you want to. And yeah, I think we have a tendency sometimes, going back to the plan is purely just focus on a particular milestone, but actually we should be really kind of celebrating success, because if not, we're not going to celebrate the success and we're just moving on to the next thing and the next thing, and actually you might have jumped some big through some big hoops and hurdles. So yeah, absolutely. I think the more that you can do that, and think about it strategically as well. So there might be an event that you are doing that you might not feel is relevant to share, but then there might be some other stuff actually you would want to get that out. So picking and choosing and thinking about what the frequency is, who your target audience is as well, again, is all going to just provide benefits for you.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's, I think people kind of forget about the community side of this, because quite often I'll speak to businesses and they'll say, oh, we've advertised the role on our social media platforms and on the website, and that's great, but if you haven't got the audience and, John down the road doesn't know that you exist, he's not following your social media and he's not going to look on your website. So I think it's kind of going, well, how do you get out in the community? And depending on the roles that you might want to recruit for, or even if you're not recruiting now, but you've got to think of the future, it's what else can you do within the community to build that profile, and either job fairs or go into the schools and the colleges, because that's your future talent. For me, even if you're not recruiting at the moment and you're a relatively small business, these kids are going to be the ones that everybody's employing in a few years, so you need to introduce yourself to them now for the future. So, I know you're a massive advocate of supporting students in schools with career advice and guidance and careers. But I just think it's a no-brainer. If you can get into schools, and like you said before, it's not one person's responsibility. This is a whole business. So get as many people as you can into different schools. So, delegate it out so not everybody's doing it on their own. But working with these kids is inspirational, and you're planting the seed of who your business is for the future. But by default, they're going to go home and go, oh, today at school, Rob MacNaught from Reckitt's came in, and their parents might be looking for work and be like, oh, Reckitt's, who are they then? So it is that knock-on effect kind of marketing as well, isn't it? So I'm a massive advocate for working with schools, even if you're not recruiting at the moment. It does really help build your brand locally.
It does. Like you say, it's one of the most rewarding things you can do, volunteering and seeing those kids get really excited and are blown away by the things that you do. But, one of the biggest things, certainly from a manufacturing, is when you go into kind of schools, is they think of a factory and somebody working on a production line. That's what they've been taught at school.
Yes.
And what you are then able to do is break that stigma to say, we have a really intelligent, highly skilled people working in our factories. They do continuous improvement roles, for example, and they take line efficiency and they make the process a lot quicker, a lot more efficient, a lot safer. And you can talk about those roles in more detail. You talk about robotics engineers and they're like, well, what do they do? And like, well, we have robots at the end of our line. This is what they do. We need specialist people to fix that. And when you start talking about the careers that you have within supply chain and manufacturing, their minds are just blown. And then what you start to see is they start to go into that a bit more detail and realize what is out there, because all they see obviously is within school and what's on social media. They don't necessarily know what goes on behind the scenes, and that's what you're able to do when you go into schools, is really, to your point, showcase what roles you have, but also career wise, you can have an amazing career in whatever you want to be from a manufacturing perspective. And we have a lot of people that, again, have joined us as apprentices, and have just progressed throughout the organization in different ways as well.
Yeah.
They might not necessarily have gone straight up, they might have gone a few sideways moves, but ultimately they've had a fantastic career by working in supply chain and manufacturing environment.
And I think that's important because, like you say, the public perception of certain industries is that factory role, or, health and social care, it's healthcare workers, and,
Yeah.
in the NHS, it's doctors and nurses. But there are so many other careers that you can have. I went to a school and spoke to a female student, and, 90% of the kids I speak to don't know what they want to be when they grow up. And I didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up. But this girl was kind of going, I'm not sure what I want to do. I'm taking art as a GCSE. I'm thinking of maybe doing fine art at college, but I'm not sure whether that'll lead to anything or whether it'll end up just being a hobby. And from talking to her about her passion for design and drawing and things, and I was talking to her about, well, you could go and work for Coca-Cola and redesign their logo in the future, and, go into graphic design, or, go and work for Pixar on their cartoons, or, and she was just like, oh, wow, never even thought in her head. She was like, oh, if I'm not Monet or Picasso, then, what is that? And I think that's it. It's broadening horizons to go, actually think about maybe some of the brands that you want to work for. And then there'll always be loads of different careers within those brands. And if we sort of tie that back into what we're saying, as an employer, you've got to promote your brand.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, because these kids are going to come and run the country in the future. So if they don't know that you exist, you're not going to attract them.
No, definitely. And I think what else you'll find as employers is the schools just want you in. They want you to come and talk to the kids. They want you to educate them, and for the teachers to be educated as well, because again, similar to technology, the world of work is changing, recruitment is changing. Some of these students are going to have to face assessment centers or multiple assessment centers, and you need to really educate these individuals as to say, what are these? This is yes, there will always be different, and they'll be unique to the role that you're applying for, or the organization, but this is kind of a feel of what something would look like, so that they've got that kind of confidence to go in there and hopefully do the best that they can, and then hopefully that leads to employment as well.
Absolutely. And I think, it's a multi-pronged approach, this, everything that we're talking about, because we go off on a tangent, but it all sort of brings it back, and it's looking at all your options. And I think one of the key things as well is, if you're looking at your employer branding, bring that into, well, what's your recruitment strategy then? So if you're focusing on promoting your employer branding to the local area, when you do need to recruit, what does that process look like? What is that strategy? And how are you going to make sure that you're getting the right people, and it's not a that'll do for now? Because a lot of businesses do the whole, I'm desperate for work, for an employee, and out of everybody, that one will do for now because I just need a bum on a seat, which is the wrong approach. But so many fall into that trap. So for me, it's kind of looking at, as part of this, it's going, well, what is your recruitment strategy? Looking at, how do you recruit? Where do you advertise the roles? What's that shortlisting CV sifting process look like? What's your interview or assessment center or whatever, how many stages do you have? I had a client recently that was using an agency and had 5 of their own stages and couldn't understand why people were pulling out of the process because it was too long. But then also, thinking about how quickly can you get through this? What's the time to hire? Because if you are taking too long and you're losing people, that's when you kind of default into that one will do because they're here. So, the recruitment process is really, really important. And also, if you spent ages promoting what a great place it is to work, and then you fall down on the recruitment process, that's a candidate's first impression of your business. There's no point in having all this amazing stuff out there and they go, great, I want to come and work for you, and then they don't hear from you, or they feel ghosted, or you've taken too long, or you keep cancelling or rearranging or whatever it might be. They're not going to look favorably on you either. So I think the recruitment process and what that strategy looks like moving forward, so you can plan ahead of time when you do need to recruit, I think is part of this plan for me.
Definitely. Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And then thinking of kind of the retention strategy. So a lot of this is, why do people want to come and work for us? What's our EVP? What's the culture and things like that? But also, talking to your staff about, well, actually, nobody has a job for life. So we need to accept that there will be a turnover. So what turnover is acceptable?
Mhm.
Because if it's too low, it's going to become stagnant. But if it's too high, obviously, hospitality, for instance, has a ridiculously high turnover. So you've got to
Yeah.
kind of get it right, but also looking at the average time people spend in them roles. So for instance, if you've got an entry level role, you might only have people for 2 years. So if you want to improve your retention strategy, it's going, right, well, I'm not going to be after them for life. If the average is 2 years and I can retain people for 3 or 4, I'm doing well. But
Mhm.
actually, how am I doing that? And what am I doing to keep them engaged and keep them here? And, so thinking about that retention piece rather than just, oh, we have a low turnover, so therefore we're fine.
Yeah.
It
No,
is going into
exactly.
detail about it, isn't it?
It is, and it's looking at all, like you say, all of those elements of the employee life cycle,
Yeah.
and really asking probably the same questions, what are we doing here? What training and development? Why would somebody want to stay here? Why would somebody want to join? Why does somebody want to leave? And it just gives you so much to work with, which again, you can then start thinking about where are your priority areas to
Yeah.
then start building into your strategy moving forward.
Yeah. And I think, as well, looking at, I think the why people are leaving is one that a lot of businesses think they do, but maybe don't go
Mhm.
into detail.
Yeah.
I've recently been speaking to some businesses, and this was one of the questions that was brought up in a workshop I delivered about how do you tackle a leaving interview? How do you find out, why they're leaving? And I think a lot of hiring managers probably go, why have you handed your notice in? What are you doing? And they accept the
Mhm.
first answer, and somebody go, oh, because I just got offered a job I can't refuse.
Yeah.
But actually, I think it's going back a couple of steps and kind of going, well, what's motivated you to look for a job, though?
Mhm.
Why did we get to this point? Why have you
Yeah.
interviewed? And, what could we have done differently? And, is there anything internally that's prompted that? And if they go, actually, no, it's a change of circumstances and, I need to work part time. We've talked about it. You can't offer me part time and that is a part time role. Then you kind of go, right, that's fine. We've had
Mhm.
lots of those discussions, but if you're completely unaware and it comes and hits you left field, you need to kind of look internally and go, hang on, how have we missed that? Are we not talking enough to our people? And are we not doing what we can to support them and
Yeah.
retain them rather than just going, oh, I know why people are leaving because I fill out a form at an exit interview. You shouldn't you shouldn't be hearing about it then, should you? You should know beforehand.
No, and at the end of the day, we're all human. We should be having that open dialogue, that honest communication. And you're right, asking those questions helps a lot. I think to add to that as well is, you've probably read horror stories as I have. Somebody resigns and then the manager doesn't talk to them, or there's a
Yeah.
real change. Is making sure that the offboarding process is just as positive as the onboarding as well. Making sure that they're still an employee, they're dedicated the time, the energy, the commitment to you is making sure that you reciprocate that all the way until, potentially they do offboard with the organization and move on to onto something else.
Yeah, and I think I've had a very, very real experience of how that's done wrong. So a
Hmm.
business I worked for, um, I handed my notice in, and at the time they spent a week with the managing director trying to counter offer me and find out why I was leaving. And at the same time as the managing director and regional director were holding counter offer meetings with me to try and keep me, my line manager was threatening to sue me because I was leaving.
Wow. Okay.
And so I was coming down and I had, you can't do this because we'll sue you. And I found out this and blah, blah, blah. And everybody was giving me the cold shoulder in the office. And then every day I had the MD and the regional director coming into the office for 2 to 3 hours. It was exhausting. I had a full week of it. But because I didn't want to burn my bridges, I was very professional and I didn't want to say to the directors, this is what's going on downstairs. And I probably should have done, but at the time you make a judgment. So I didn't. And I was going downstairs, and they was, my manager was saying, well, what did they say? So I was repeating what they were saying, and they were like, well, I just don't get why you wouldn't stay. And and it was just two completely different situations. And I remember I was poorly, and they didn't put me on garden leave because my line manager expected me to cover their holiday. So I had to cover their holiday, but I ended up being really, really poorly. And then on my couple of last days when I went back in, I was still ill, but I was like determined to finish it. And I had to hand back my car and one thing and another. So they were like, oh, what do you want to do for your leaving do? And I was like, I don't want one. Because of how I'd been treated, I didn't want one.
No.
And then as a leaving present, I basically got a branded gift bag with branded merchandise in it. I didn't actually get a leaving present.
Okay.
So, for me, having experienced a bad exit, it can really affect you moving forward. Now, don't get me wrong, I was very glad I was leaving. And if I didn't know before I was making the right decision, I certainly did by the time I left.
Yeah.
But it doesn't give, because I tell people about this, and so it doesn't paint them in a very good light that that's how they treat their staff, when all I was doing was trying to move on with my career. And I was trying to be very professional, and they weren't necessarily. So you are absolutely right. Your offboarding is as important as your onboarding. And definitely. I'm also going to throw in there, if you have to do a restructure or do any outplacement and redundancy, it is equally as important to think about that process in terms of exiting people. You still want to make that as a positive experience as possible as well, don't you?
Yeah, redundancies are hard for everybody. There's nothing positive from it at all. There's a legal framework that we have to operate within, and naturally all organizations have to do that. But the reality is having that open dialogue, allowing people to, and everybody goes through the change curve very differently. So people will be at different stages of that. So just being adaptable to the scenario and to those individuals, and just support them along. And the best change programs I've seen is where people have walked away and said, do you know what, it's happened. Okay, it was a shock, and I'm sad to be leaving, but I've been trapped very, very well, and I really appreciate that. And I think if you get to that point, you've nailed it, basically. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I see a lot of people in my world who have been made redundant. It's one of the main reasons why people come to a recruitment agency. They've lost a job, they've been made redundant, but the stories do differ. And there are some brilliant businesses out there who do support that transition period and offer a lot of support. But then there are others where, employees feel like they've just been thrown to the wolves and it's every man for himself. I think exiting a business is equally as important as joining a business when you are looking at your employer branding. And the best analogy I have is if you go out to a restaurant for a meal and you have a bad either experience with service or food, you will tell everybody, won't you? You tell 10 people straight away and go, do not go there, it's horrendous. If you have a good experience, you might only tell one or two. So it's harder to build up the positive side, but it is so easy to just absolutely kill that reputation. So when people leave your business, you need to focus on that as much as what you do when they're joining, because they will absolutely slate you if they have a bad time.
Yeah, definitely.
Wow. So at the very end then, so we've covered off kind of the analysis. We've looked at why do we want people to come and work for us? Where do we want to be? Then we've looked at putting this plan in place. And we've said it's very much a journey, not a destination. So for me, my thoughts are the last step is kind of continually kind of looking at where are we? Is that working well? Is it not working well? What do we need to change? So it's that kind of sort of review, feedback, making tweaks, making changes. Am I right in thinking that?
Yeah, effectively. So you've got your plan, you're obviously going to deliver the plan. And what's key, I would say, is you need the discipline, you need the consistency, and you need the agility. So the discipline and the consistency is effectively saying what you set out to do and doing what you set out to do, and making sure that, you've still got that energy and that commitment where you need it. But the agility comes in because the world will change, and you might do an initiative that hasn't worked particularly particularly well and you might need to start again. So having that agility to say, this isn't working, we're going to try something different, is really key in this process, because not everything you set out to do will be 100% effective. So it's going in again with that mindset. And then to your point is that reviewing. So, if you're looking at kind of your adverts or your recruitment strategy, are you getting an increase in applications, for example? Are you getting an interest on your website hits, all of that type of thing? So thinking about what, as part of this plan, what are the key metrics that you're going to use in order to measure the progress that you are making? Because again, if you don't have those, how do you know whether you're winning or making an impact, basically? So again, it's important to spend time on that and continually feed that back to the organization.
Yeah, because I think, it's one thing going, okay, well, what we're going to do is, drive all applications to jobs to our website. But then if you're not measuring the traffic to the website, how do you know whether it's working or not? It's one thing saying it
exactly.
and, putting a link to the website everywhere. But if you don't measure that, or, you go, oh, actually, we're not going to advertise on Indeed anymore. We're going to, use LinkedIn or other social media platforms or whatever. How are you measuring not necessarily the quantity of applications, but maybe the quality? Because that's the thing, is you want the better quality of people. But then, it's looking at, if you're rolling out some new training, what kind of buy-in have you got in terms of people signing up for it? Is that improving? One-to-ones and appraisals are improving? Like you say, what are all the metrics of how you're measuring the success of this? And, keep looking at it, keep reviewing. And if it's not working, change it.
Sure. Exactly that. And there is, like I said at the start, there's so much to go at here. So you could spend, your whole organization could be working on this if you're not careful. It's about just break it down into stages. So if it's generally the recruitment side of things, okay, really focus on that element of it and put the plan in place for that. And then you can move on to something else when you start to see some of the positives from it. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think, the important thing is that, it's not an overnight journey, this.
No.
It takes time, but I think you're right when you say you've got to be committed to it. So keep going, work together. And actually, one of the things that's come right the way through this is that communication. So communicating with each other as maybe senior leadership team, but communicating with your people so they know what's going on. Because actually, if they feel like you are working on things, even if it goes wrong, they're probably not going to be as bad as if they didn't know it was happening.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And also they will be able to give you the feedback as to whether they feel it's working or not, or if there's actually something from an organization perspective that you've missed and actually we need to focus a bit more on here. This is why the full organization ultimately need to be involved in this.
Yeah, no, amazing. There's some really, really good stuff there. And hopefully everyone who's listening will be making sort of frantic notes. You can go back and re-listen to it. And are there any other bits of advice that you think we need to kind of cover off before we finish off today? Because we have said quite a lot.
Yeah, there is a lot there. I think, that for me, the phase 1 and 2 of being very open and honest and transparent is key. If you don't get that right, you're not going to get the rest of it right, really. So I think it's very, very important that you spend a lot of time and involve the right people as part of that process, definitely. I think as well is, the smaller organizations that are listening to this as well, you might think, well, I'm not going to be able to compete with a large FMCG or global organization. You might not be able to compete on the same scale, but there's lots of things that you can do. And it's about just thinking outside the box as to what you can do in comparison to other organizations that are in your area. And then probably the third element is to your point that you raised there, Kelly, is that commitment side. Is you've got to be committed to this and you're in it for the long haul, but also have the agility to say, if this is not working or this is not what we expected, to be able to pivot onto something slightly different potentially.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's really, really great advice. And, coming from somebody who's working for a business that has gone through this journey and is continually evolving and, like you say, having the agility to change as the market changes, I think it's really great advice for anybody in the area. And like you say, even if you're a small business, there's still a lot you can do. And not all of it is financial. there's a lot of things that don't cost the earth that you can do just by sat there brainstorming, talking to your people and going, actually, I didn't know that that was something that you guys didn't like. I can easily change it. That's not a problem. So yeah, there's loads and loads of things for people to go at. But thank you so much for today, Rob. It's been an absolute pleasure as always. And hopefully everybody will have some great sort of top tips that they can take away from this. So thank you again, Rob.
No, thank you, Kelly. Thank you very much.